Hello, welcome to my video, and today I'm covering some games from round 11 from Grand Swiss. I'm gonna start with board 1. Grigoriy, Oparin and Alireza Firouzja were playing there. The opening was Berlin in the Ruy Lopez. And Oparin went for the exchange on c6 early on. He took on c6, and after dc he castled, and now Alireza plays knight d7 to defend the pawn. Here Oparin plays c3, trying to go for d4 and trying to force black to be more passive. Now black castles, and now d4 and bishop d6 by Firouzja. And here we have a waiting game. The first one who releases the tension in the center allows the other side some pluses. For example, if white takes on e5 early, then knight takes on e5 and the bishop gets out from c8. On the other side, if black takes on d4, then white takes with the c pawn and gets his knight to c3, and also he has a nice pawn center. So they kind of play the game of chicken, who is going to crack first. Black plays bishop g5, and after f6 goes to h4, tries to get to g3 and put even more pressure on the e5 pawn. Queen e8, anticipating bishop g3 and defending the e5 square. Now knight d2, protecting e4, and now black is expanding on the queen side with a5, queen c2, and now queen f7, pointing towards a2 pawn, so the rook from a1 cannot move. White goes bishop g3, and now a4, trying to get even more space on the queen side. And here white plays b3. Here, if he took on e5, let me just show you this. He took on e5, he would take with the knight, and after capturing fe, the e5 pawn seems weak, but it's not very approachable. He can attack it only with the knight, and the queen cannot get to attack the e5 pawn. So in case of rook fe1, let's say, bishop e6, and in case you try something like knight f3 to attack the pawn on e5, black always has a nice move, queen h5, defending the pawn, and later on he might be able to double on the f-file and create even some counterplay on the king side. So in the game, b3 was played, and now black chooses to take on d4, and now white takes on d6, which is a bit strange to me because it fixes the pawn structure, but on the other side, on the other hand, it eliminates the bishop pair. I think it was still better to play something like this, having the full center d4 a4 pawns, and still I think black would struggle to achieve full equality. Instead he captured on d6, and after cd, knight d4, we had some exchanges, and after d5 I think that black is equalizing completely. He liquidates the center, and he will have no problems after this exchange occurs. Now white tried knight c4, but Alireza goes for knight e5, centralizing his knight, knight b6, and he goes back. Now he took on c8, queen c8, and after knight f5 he wants to go knight e7 next to take the queen, but now rook d1 and knight f7 to cover any potential entries on the d6 square, and also preparing rook d8 as a move. And here white plays knight d4, black goes back, and here they repeat moves and they agree to a draw. Because after a move like h3 to make breathing space for his king, black can answer with rook d8 and offer a trade of rooks, and after taking, this position is equal. On the board 3 we had a game between Yangyi and Maxime Vachier Lagrave, and they played Najdorf with h3, and after e5, knight b3, bishop e6, bishop e3, bishop e7, now Yangyi chose to play f4, after which MVL took, and bishop f4. Now after these all exchanges, d6 pawn is vulnerable and black has to rearrange his pieces to block the bishop on f4 and get one of the knights to e5. This is the minus of white's position, because black gets his knight to e5, but on the other hand he gets a better control over d5 square, so d5 push is less likely to happen in the future. Black goes knight c6, queen e2, and now knight d7, trying to get one of his knights to e5. White castles, and now knight c5. Knight is nicely placed on the e5 square. White goes to b1, and now rook c8. Queen e3 was played, and now castles. White went with g4 now. If he tried immediately to go towards f5 by knight d4, black can play rook e8, and now after knight f5 without g4 first, he could capture, and go bishop f6. And now black can play next knight c4, and the position is really double-edged in this case. So first he tries to get g4, rook e8 was played, and now knight d4. Queen a5, and now a3. a3 was played because rook c3 was potentially dangerous for white. Rook c3 and then capturing the pawn on a2. And now he goes for b5, trying to use the a3 pawn to open up the position. Knight f5, and now the difference between, if he captures on f5 now, on bishop f6, now he has queen g3 and threatening g5 next. While in the previous case, the pawn was not on g4 and he would not threaten anything with queen g3. So here black opens up the queen side by b4. First white took on e7, took, and now takes on b4. Queen takes, and now queen d4. Trying to exchange queens and get into a better ending where d6 pawn is very loose, and also a6 pawn is a weakness. Logically black avoids this exchange. Now white takes, but still there is danger of a potential attack on the c-file. And here MVL plays rook e8. Here it was interesting to sacrifice the exchange by rook c3, and in case of bc to go back with the rook, and in this case white's king would be very vulnerable in case he starts to run with king c1. Then black would take on c3, and if white tries to consolidate by queen d4, then queen a3 would be played, and after queen b2, queen f3 would regain some material, while white's king would still be in the danger. Instead, he went immediately rook e8, and now knight d5 was played. Queen a4 by black. It was better to go to capture on d5, and if queen takes, to go back to c7, and after a move like queen d2, to get to b6. And even though white is a pawn up, his position is not pleasant, and probably he would have to bail out with a repetition of moves like queen d4 or queen d6 to harass black's queen and to try to get a perpetual. Anything else would be a very big risk. Instead he went for queen a4, and now rook h2, defending the c2 pawn. He took on d5, queen takes, and now knight f6, targeting the e4 pawn, and after queen b3, offering the exchange, he took on e4, and now white makes a mistake. He takes on e5. It was better to keep the bishop there, like with rook f2, and in case of the potential attack on the b file, to have bishop c1 as a defense resource. So here he took, and queen e5 was played, rook e2, knight e4 now, avoiding exchanges, and now bishop g2 is impossible because of knight c3, and the rook on e2 is hanging, so he plays queen d5 instead, offering a trade, queen f4, and now king a1. To get out from these checks, knight c3. which were possible in at this moment. G6, and now white is pinning the knight on the e-file, and here black tries something with rook c5, but now white takes, and we have two rooks versus queen position. After king g7, he went back to defend, and after queen d4, he wants to play knight a4 next, but white plays king b1, and after knight a4, rook b3, now they repeat moves. Probably they saw that it's unnecessary to make any risks, and they just finished it in a draw. And the final game for this recap is the game between Fabiano Caruana and Alexandr Predke. We'll begin from this position. The opening was Ruy Lopez, as you can maybe guess. And here Fabiano plays bishop c2, avoiding trade of bishops, because if the trade happens, he would weaken his light squares on the queen side, so he avoids it. And now Predke plays d5, trying to open up the center, but also at the same time he's weakening his e5 pawn. Now Fabi took, and queen takes. Rook b1, he wants to go rook b5 next, and to attack the e5 pawn even more. And black tries to counter that with rook b8. But Fabiano plays rook b5 anyways. And the point is that after rook takes, now white has c4. And black plays queen d6, ab, and the a5 pawn is now weak. Also, e5 pawn is very exposed. Black tries to defend it indirectly by knight d4, because if white captures now on e5, then bishop h3 is very strong, and after gh, rook e5. Instead, in the game, bishop b2 was played, and after knight f3, queen takes, queen b4, because he has to defend his pawn somehow, and he wants to deflect the rook from e1 by playing queen b4, and now white has to go rook b1, and now the pressure on e5 is decreased. Queen d2, attacking the bishop, and now queen d1, offering the trade, and now black took and went bishop b4. Again, in case of some move like bishop e5, black can take on c4, and it's basically a trade of pawns. Nothing much. So he plays bishop f3 instead, and now e4 was played. Here it was better to play knight d7 for black. And if white tries knight f1 to get his knight to e3, then after knight c5, d3 pawn is a liability, and black would even be slightly better. But instead he plays e4, and after d4 he takes on c4. And now the b5 pawn is also loose, so white tries to bail out somehow to save his position. He plays e5, and now knight d5 is played by black. Here, paradoxically, knight h7 was better, getting knight to a more passive square. But now after that move, b5 pawn is going to be taken very soon. And white would have to go bishop e2 here, after which black would capture, and after knight takes, rook d8 would lead to a slightly better endgame for black, because he's in the control over the d-file, and the passed a pawn is also a very important factor. Instead he went for more natural knight d5, and after that rook c1 was played, and you can see that bishop and knight are not coordinated well, and now he has to go back to b6. And he tries knight f5, going for the e3 square, after which the c7 pawn is going to be exposed. Black plays bishop d3, and now after knight e3, he takes on b5. And after rook c7, we had rook e7, offering a trade, but Fabiano doesn't want it, goes back, and now rook d7 by black. Still, white has to be precise here, because black's a pawn might be a decisive factor if something goes wrong. Bishop e4, with bishop e4, white is trying to force black's knight to stay on b6, because in case of knight a4, then white has rook c8, and after bishop f8, bishop a3 would be quite embarrassing for black. So he plays bishop d2 here, and after rook c5, now massive exchanges occur. After bishop f3, king h7, rook c6, and now black took on e3 and went knight c4, bishop d4, and now rook e7, targeting the e5 pawn, and now rook a5 also. Black pushes his pawn, a4, and now bishop c6, attacking the a3 pawn, a3, but now bishop b5, and black cannot avoid exchanges now. So he goes knight b2, and after bishop b2, bishop b5, bishop takes pawn, and after rook b7, white went for e6, after which they agreed for a draw. Because after fe6, the structure will be symmetrical with opposite color bishops and rooks on the board without any space advantage for both sides. It's a clear draw. Thank you all for watching and have a nice day. Goodbye.